In addition to NTFS permissions, we have the concept of shared folders in Windows 10. You have to share a folder in order for the items inside that folder to be accessible over the network. And so you can set NTFS permissions all you want, but if you want something to be accessible on a machine, it's got to be in a shared folder. Only folders can be shared, not individual files. And the sharing of a folder actually adds additional permissions. Okay, and so it's there that we kind of need to focus on. Sharing a folder is very simple, but we need to make sure that we've got the appropriate permissions so that people can access the right information. There are technically two different kinds of sharing. There's any folder sharing and public folder sharing. Now, any folder sharing means you can go to any folder and you can share it with other people. Public folder sharing means that only the public directories, the public libraries, are shared. And that's done in a smaller situation where you don't want to mess with it. You're in a home network, and so you just dump anything in the public. Anything put in the public, all users on that computer can access, and users from other computers are able to access as well. But in business environments, we would typically be doing any folder sharing, albeit that you may not be sharing folders on a Windows client that often. At that point, you've got two types of any folder sharing. So two broad categories, any folder and then public folder sharing, and then we've got basic versus advanced. So basic sharing allows me to share folders really quickly. It configures the permissions for me, and so you could just right click, I want to share with my home group, right click, I want to share with this particular user, and that's all that it really asks you. You can then choose if they can read or write, but it's a little drop-down box. It's not the permissions that we just saw. If you go into advanced, it gives you some other options. You can change the share name. Sometimes the name of a folder might be long. It might include spaces. I don't want that, so I can modify the share name. I could create a hidden share by throwing a $ at the end of the folder. You might wonder, why are we doing that? Well, sometimes I want a folder accessible over the network, but I don't necessarily need everybody to see it. It's just so that I can get to the data inside it from another computer. So we could do that. We could set a maximum number of concurrent connections. We could set caching options, whether people can mark the files in that folder as being available offline. And we could set permissions. Now the permissions are going to be not as granular as NTFS, not even close. It's read, change, and full control. And so read allows you to read as well as read and execute. Change allows you to edit and delete, and then full control is full writes. So you have those options when you do the advanced sharing. There are also multiple methods for sharing. You can share through File Explorer. There's going to be an option up in the toolbar when you click on a folder to share it, or you can go to the Sharing tab in the folder properties. In the Sharing tab in the folder properties, you have both basic and advanced sharing. If you use the toolbar, it's just doing basic. You can also share it through the command line. Not sure why you would, but you have the net share command. Through computer management, there's a shared folder snap-in, and then through PowerShell. The new SMB share, get SMB share, grant SMB share access, that would allow you to assign permission. So you can choose the method you want. Obviously, the easiest method is just to use File Explorer, because on a client, we're probably sharing in a limited fashion anyway. So let's take a look at these different methods. We go into this area, go and create a new folder. Right-click the folder, and I can say I want to share with, and I say specific people. Okay. Now this would be adding a user in on this computer or in the domain, and then basically just specifying whether they have read or read and write. That's basic sharing. When you click share, it's going to do it, and it's not going to ask you anything else. If you go to the properties and go to sharing, if you click this, it's the basic sharing, or you can click advanced. We click on advanced, we say we want to share this folder. Now I can change the name if I want. I can add the number of users. You can change permissions. Usually I'll go like that. Everyone group gets full control. And then caching, we can choose or leave it at the default. The default is that only files and programs the users specify are going to be available offline. And so that means they have to right-click a folder and say, I want to make this available offline, and then it caches it. You generally don't change that unless we, for some reason, don't want them to them to do the caching. I didn't mean to hit cancel there. Go back here. Okay, so we'll hit apply and then OK and close, and that is your advanced sharing. Now it shows me the network path that somebody would take to get to that shared folder. Now the other option, computer management. That opens up. There we go. Computer management, you've got the shared folder snap in. Here's shares. Here you would get more of a sharing wizard. So if you want, you can use that. Say eData. Share name that you want to use, description, offline settings. Here we have some slightly different permissions. You know, administrators full access, everybody else nothing, or administrators full, everybody else read. Or you can hit customize, hit custom, and then just make the change. And I'll be explaining in a second why I keep giving the everyone group full control. But basically there you get all of the options. You know, your folders are going to show up in here as well, so this is a good place to go. You can see current sessions with your computer, current open files. So the shared folders snap in is certainly useful. You know, and then like I said, you got Windows PowerShell, the get SMB share will list out the shared folders. The new SMB share would actually create shared folders. New SMB share, the name of the shared folder, test, the path to the shared folder, ctest, you know, something like that. And I mean, there are going to be other things. Is it continuously available, concurrent user limit, say 50, the caching mode, the folder enumeration mode is basically controlling what they're able to see inside. So you have a few other options here, and that would share that folder. I'm not going to run that command because that folder doesn't exist, but that would be the command that would share the folder, and then the grant SMB access would assign the permission. So if you want to use PowerShell or just kind of play around with that so you're familiar with those commands, that's probably a good idea. One last thing on shared folders and NTFS permissions is that, you know, the folder has to be shared in order for somebody to be able to access it over the network. And every time you share a folder, then it does the shared folder permissions. Well, that means users are going to require both shared folder and NTFS permissions in order to be able to access resources. By themselves, both of these are cumulative. So shared folder permissions are cumulative and NTFS permissions are cumulative. That means on either side, it's always the least restrictive permission that is granted to a user or group. However, when you combine them, it flips that around. And now it's the most restrictive permission that wins. It's not shared folder beating NTFS or vice versa. It's whichever one is the most restrictive. And so that's why I have gone in and given the everyone group full control, because the NTFS permissions are far more granular. They allow you to get much more specific as to the type of access that you want them to have. If you set the shared folder at everyone and the NTFS permission is only at read, then they will get read. Okay? If it was the other way around and shared folder permission was read and you gave them full control NTFS, intending them to get full control, they'd only get read. This is why I say the default permission for the everyone group doesn't work in a lot of environments, because the default permission for the everyone group was read only. And so even if you granted greater rights, greater permissions within NTFS, they would be limited by the shared folder permission. So the long-standing best practice, and I don't know why they don't change the default personally, but long-standing best practice has been to grant full control at the shared folder level. Basically, you're sharing it just so it's shared. Then use NTFS to provide the actual permissions. Okay? If it says full control at shared folder and I've only got read on NTFS, then I'm only going to get read. And so, you know, you have to do both, because the lack of a permission of either permission is going to prevent access. And but it's much easier if you just always do full control on the shared folder side, so you're only ever worrying about NTFS permissions. Do keep in mind that effective permissions feature only shows NTFS permissions. So I had said something at that point. I said, well, even if the administrator shows up as full control, he could actually have less permissions than that because the shared folder permissions weren't evaluated. So it's just something to think about. By themselves, they're least restrictive. Together, you get the most restrictive between shared folders and NTFS permissions.